Hi guys, tonight we step straight into the crooked lanes of medieval England, where your shoes sink into mud and your nostrils flare against the pungent smoke of wood and dung fires. The air feels heavy, the kind that clings to your cloak long after you've tried shaking it out. Chickens dart between your ankles, pigs grunt freely in the alleys, and if you're not careful, you'll trip over the jutting stones of poorly laid cobblestones. Already you sense this isn't some fairy tale castle scene, but a world that smells of sweat, hearth smoke, and ale. And here's the honest truth, you probably wouldn't survive this for long. Disease, hunger, and the constant weight of labor would snap your modern spine faster than you think. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, and let your imagination carry you through the narrow streets where medieval women once lived and breathed. The first thing that hits you is the rhythm of life itself, slower and yet harder than what you're used to. Dawn isn't an alarm clock, it's the cock's crow echoing across thatched roofs and the distant peal of a church bell. Women wake before the sun, pulling rough wool over their shoulders, hands already busy with spinning, kneading, or milking before a word is even spoken. Records confirm that the majority of the English population, well over 90%, lived in rural communities. So when you picture medieval England, don't think castles first. Think farms, mud huts, and villages whose world rarely stretched beyond a day's walk. Oddly enough, though, these villages could be noisy places. You'd hear the hammering of smiths, the laughter of children chasing hoops, and the muttered gossip of women at the well. And that gossip mattered. For women in particular, social networks were lifelines, whether you needed to borrow a spindle, get news of a midwife, or simply share the latest scandal about whose cow wandered into whose garden. But here's where the contradictions creep in. Scholars bicker over whether women had more freedom in these tight-knit early communities compared to later, more centralized times. On one hand, you're working in the fields, trading at market, running households while men march to wars. On the other, your legal rights remain tangled in customs that favor male guardianship. It's a constant push and pull, necessary to village survival, yet restrained by tradition and law. Imagine the sights pressing on your eyes: narrow timber, framed cottages with smoke curling through holes in the roof. The smells: two baked bread, tallow candles, and the unmissable stench of open drains running past doorways. And yes, you step carefully, because chamber pots are emptied right onto the street, sometimes from a second-floor window without warning. If you're unlucky, you're wearing that mess until the next wash, which might not come soon. Soap is rare. Lye burns the skin. You scratch constantly from fleas. But then, so does everyone else. Yet there's colour amid the grime. In your ears, a lute tune drifts from the tavern. On feast days, banners ripple in bright dyes, and women stitch their sleeves with embroidery that glimmers in candlelight. Children's laughter fills the alleys, even as their little feet are bare and chapped. For a moment, it feels as though joy insists on blooming no matter the mud. You sense the sharp division between noble and peasant households, even at first glance. A noblewoman might rise in a chamber lined with tapestries, her servants bustling with warm water. You, meanwhile, would wake to a thatched roof shedding dust, and a draught sharp enough to bite through your blanket. But whether in manor or hovel, the expectations press down. You are daughter, wife, or widow, rarely a free agent. Still, survival teaches resilience. Women barter clever deals at the market, stretch scraps of wool into cloaks, and gather herbs not only for flavor but for medicine. A curious footnote: some villages even appointed ale tasters, often men but sometimes women too, to ensure no one diluted the brew. It sounds quaint, but imagine the tension when your livelihood depends on whether your ale is deemed strong enough. And as you drift deeper into this world, you can't help wondering, how much choice do you really have? You're alive in a place where storms wipe out harvests, where childbirth lurks as a daily risk, and where the smallest accusation could twist into a court summons. Yet through all of it, women's hands hold the rhythm of life together, baking, birthing, brewing, healing. The men might get their names in chronicles, but the world would have collapsed without these silent labors. The day is just beginning, the first church bell still ringing. Already your body aches as if you've lived 100 lives in one morning, and yet this is only the start. Your mind drifts to the sound of a lullaby, soft and almost drowned out by the creak of a wooden cradle. Childhood in medieval England isn't carefree, not for girls. From the moment you can walk, your small hands are pressed into service. You carry water, fetch firewood, guard chickens, and learn the rhythm of spinning wool or kneading dough. The scent of yeast clings to your fingers, and the rough scrape of the spinning wheel burns your palms. Childhood feels short, not because of birthdays you're counting, but because responsibility weighs heavier than play. Records confirm that children as young as 5 or 6 were often entrusted with labor tasks, herding geese, scaring birds from crops, or tending to younger siblings. The family economy demands it. If you're a peasant girl, you quickly discover there's no such thing as idle hands. By contrast, noble daughters are sometimes shielded from heavy work. But don't mistake that for freedom their time is filled with endless practice in embroidery, music, and manners, all rehearsals for the marriage market. Oddly enough, there are games threaded through the duties. Girls play with rag dolls sewn from scraps, toss balls made of pig bladders, and join boys in rough and tumble games that make your knees raw and your skirts muddy. There's laughter, but always within earshot of an adult's command. A curious footnote? Archaeologists have unearthed tiny carved bone toys from medieval sites, horses, knights, even miniature cooking pots, proof that even in hardship, someone spared a thought for children's delight. Still, life expectancy looms like a shadow over the nursery. Many children never see adulthood. Illnesses sweep through villages, measles, dysentery, fevers, and mothers know loss as intimately as lullabies. The high-pitched wail of a mother mourning echoes often enough that you can almost hear it in the background, a grim refrain to childhood. And then there is learning such as it is. For most girls, education means watching, imitating, memorizing. You learn your letters not in a classroom but through prayers whispered in church. Latin, the language of books, is out of reach for many, though records prove some wealthier girls were taught to read psalters or keep household accounts. Your mind shapes not just around chores but also around survival. What herbs ease fevers, which neighbors can be trusted, how to tell when rain is coming by the color of the sky. Scholars still argue whether childhood itself was even considered a distinct stage of life in medieval thought. Did adults view children as little adults, miniature workers to be molded quickly? Or did they see them as needing nurture and protection, even within the limits of poverty? Evidence points both ways, woodcuts showing children at games, but also court records describing 7-year-olds punished as if they were grown. The smells of this world are unmistakable. Porridge bubbling over the hearth, the tang of sheep dung on your shoes, the waxy smoke of tallow candles dripping down. You squat on a low stool, your skirt brushing the dirt floor, humming as your mother teaches you to weave rushes into a basket. Every motion is a rehearsal for your adult role. Even your doll play often mimics marriage ceremonies or household duties. It feels as though childhood is less about discovery and more about preparation. And yet, despite the weight of work, joy sneaks in. You steal an apple from the orchard, hide under the table while older siblings chatter, or chase fireflies when dusk settles on the village. Sometimes a traveling minstrel passes through, strumming ballads that make your eyes widen with wonder. For a moment, you imagine other worlds beyond the hedge and the parish boundary, though the reality is you'll likely never leave. Girls are especially watched for signs of obedience. A sharp tongue is frowned upon. A quiet, industrious manner earns praise. Already your value is being measured not by your laughter, but by how well you fit into the fabric of family and community. By the time you're 10, whispers of betrothal might circle your name. Childhood isn't so much ending as it is folding seamlessly into adulthood, like turning a page that was always destined. Your ears catch the distant ringing of another bell, this one calling you toward lessons in prayer or a reminder to return from play. The sound is sharp, carrying through cold morning air, nudging you back to reality. Even in these tender years, your world is already mapped out by the expectations of others. Childhood feels like a fleeting candle flame, flickering in a drafty cottage, glowing bright for a brief moment before it's pressed into the long corridor of duty. For a moment, it feels as though chalk dust clings to your fingertips, smudging across rough wooden boards. Education, at least for girls in medieval England, is more patchwork than plan. Unless you're the daughter of a noble or a wealthy merchant, you won't sit at a desk with parchment and quill. Your classroom is the kitchen, the field, the loom. And yet, learning seeps in through prayers, songs, and the repetition of household tasks. Records confirm that cathedral schools and grammar schools almost exclusively admitted boys, training them for the clergy or legal work. Girls, by contrast, absorbed what literacy they could at home or in convent schools, if their parents could spare them. If you're lucky enough to enter a nunnery, you'll learn not only to pray but also to read scripture, copy manuscripts, and sometimes even manage accounts. Otherwise, your literacy might be limited to the words of the paternoster and the ability to sign your name with a shaky cross. Oddly enough, some merchant daughters were taught more than prayers. They learned arithmetic for tallying goods, foreign phrases for trade, and neat handwriting for keeping records. In a way, the hum of commerce created tiny openings for women to know more than the church expected. A curious footnote comes from one 15th-century London account book that includes careful entries written by a woman's hand, proof that not all female learning was confined to embroidery patterns. But there's a tension in the air. Scholars bicker over whether widespread female illiteracy was a deliberate suppression or simply a byproduct of scarce resources. On one hand, parchment is expensive, tutors rarer still, and literacy not seen as essential for most women. On the other, when noble women are praised for their learning, and queens correspond in Latin or French, it's clear that opportunity existed just unevenly distributed. The atmosphere of learning is saturated with sensory detail. The waxy smell of candles in a convent scriptorium, the rasp of a reed pen on parchment, the scratch of wool against your arm as you bend over a prayer book. Or perhaps it's the scent of baked bread in your own home, as your mother recites a psalm while teaching you to weave. Every lesson is practical, woven into daily life, and often tinged with the rhythms of devotion. For most girls, memorization is the true tool of learning. You recite the Ave Maria until it sinks into muscle memory. You practice carving letters into wax tablets if you're fortunate enough to have them. But the bulk of your knowledge comes by imitation. You watch how herbs are prepared, how accounts are tallied, how fabrics are cut. The mind becomes a vessel for skills rather than texts. A scandalous aside slips in here. Some clerics worried about literate women using their knowledge improperly, perhaps penning charms or heretical texts. The anxiety reveals itself in sermons that warn against women reading without guidance. Yet, paradoxically, women were also trusted as guardians of oral knowledge, nursery rhymes, folk remedies, family histories, all of which preserved culture as surely as ink on vellum. Your ears catch the murmur of a psalm sung in Latin, incomprehensible to many yet strangely comforting. In your hands, a piece of chalk leaves pale lines across a board, soon rubbed away by a sleeve. The impermanence of it feels fitting. Your learning may be fleeting, fragile, but it shapes your mind in ways that linger. Imagine yourself by firelight, squinting at a psalter, stumbling through words you only half understand. The glow dances on the page while outside, the sound of animals bedding down fills the night. Education may not define your role in this society, but it gives you glimpses of something beyond, something that whispers of possibilities outside the boundaries of hearth and field. And so, with knowledge stitched unevenly into your life, some in prayers, some in ledgers, some in herbs, you step toward adulthood. Your mind is sharpened, not by formal schooling, but by the demands of survival, by the songs of faith, and by the skills passed from hand to hand. Learning, though limited, becomes another thread in the tapestry of what it means to be a woman in medieval England. The sound of wedding bells seems to echo faintly in your ears, though the ceremony you're about to step into feels less about romance and more about contracts. Courtship in medieval England isn't a flutter of love notes or moonlit serenades. It's negotiations whispered between families, coin purses jingling as much as hearts. You glance at a veil laid across your lap, its fabric coarse but important, and realize that this moment isn't yours alone. It's an alliance, a binding of property and kin. Records confirm that betrothals could be arranged when girls were shockingly young, sometimes as early as 12, with consummation often delayed until physical maturity. Marriage served as a social glue, binding farms, guilds, and noble houses into stronger nets of obligation. Consent technically mattered. Canon law demanded both bride and groom agree, but in practice, a girl's opinion was often nudged, pressured, or ignored in the face of her family's wishes. A curious sideline appears here. Handfasting, an informal promise made by clasping hands, sometimes sealed marriages long before priests were present. Villagers could recognize such unions, though priests later thundered against them. Imagine the gossip. A girl and boy caught clasping hands in a barn, whispered about as already wed, even if no feast followed. Your senses take in the crowded church on the wedding day, incense hanging heavy in the rafters, wax dripping in slow tears down candles, the coarse touch of wool sleeves brushing against you as relatives press close. If you're peasant-born, your feast might be nothing more than bread, ale, and perhaps a slab of cheese if fortune smiles. If noble, the air fills with roasted meats, spiced wine, and the thrum of minstrels. Either way, your belly knots more with uncertainty than celebration. Scholars still argue whether medieval marriage was primarily about economics, or whether affection quietly threaded itself into daily bonds. Chronicles highlight dowries, inheritance, and property clauses, yet poems and court records reveal couples who cared deeply, who sued for separation because of cruelty, or who simply clung together through hardship. Was love incidental, or was it always hiding beneath the weight of obligation? The evidence refuses to give a single answer. Your feet shift uncomfortably as vows are spoken, the priest's Latin flowing over you like water you cannot quite grasp. The kiss of peace may come, or not, it depends on local custom. Then the dance begins, rough boots stamping earth or polished slippers gliding across stone. You're swept into movement, your body guided as if your will has already been given over to this new role. But there's a murmur under the laughter. Some weddings ended in scandal, secret pre-contracts discovered, kinship ties too close for comfort, or whispered accusations of coercion, one scandalous aside from the records. In 14th century York, a girl's marriage was annulled after it emerged. She had been pledged to another man as a child, a forgotten promise rising suddenly to wreck her life. Such entanglements weren't rare, and courts spent years untangling webs of promise and betrayal. Your fingertips brush the veil again. It feels scratchy, ordinary, yet it marks a threshold. Behind you lies girlhood. Ahead lies the burden of a household and the expectation of children. The world does not pause to ask if you're ready. Instead, bells fade into the night air, and your life as someone's wife begins, your body, your labor, and your future folded neatly into another's name. Your fingers curl around a small leather purse, the weight of coins inside feeling both hopeful and heavy. Dowries and property, these are the true backbone of marriage in medieval England. You might dream of affection, but it's the jingling of silver, the tally of livestock, and the rolling of parchment that really seals your fate. A dowry isn't pocket money. It's your family's investment in your future, and a husband's guarantee that he can support the union. Records confirm that dowries could take many forms: money, land, clothing, even livestock. For peasants, a cow or a parcel of grain might suffice. For nobles, estates, titles, and staggering sums were exchanged. The dowry didn't just vanish into a husband's pocket, it often served as insurance, meant to sustain you should you be widowed. In theory, at least. In practice, husbands controlled the assets, and women had to fight tooth and nail to reclaim their portion when misfortune struck. One curious footnote emerges from urban life. Widows of merchants sometimes took charge of their late husbands' shops, using their dowries and joint property to continue trading. London Guild records mention women selling cloth, ale, or spices under their own names. For some, the dowry became not just insurance but a launching pad into a kind of independence, rare though precarious. You notice the feel of parchment under your palm as a marriage contract is unrolled. Ink smudges slightly where clerks rushed the script, listing cows, coins, or acres, as if they were items on a shopping list. Around you, the smell of ink mixes with damp stone walls, and the faint aroma of incense from a nearby chapel. The weight of these promises hangs heavier than the veil you once wore because everything now is bound to property. Arguments split along whether dowry practices restricted women or empowered them. On one hand, you're reduced to an asset, valued for the goods you bring into a marriage. On the other, the law at least recognized your right to a portion of wealth, something you could claim in widowhood. Was this a form of protection, or simply another leash in the hands of patriarchal structures? No agreement has been reached on whether dowries should be read as chains or shields. Your ears catch the murmur of neighbors outside, speculating, tallying, gossiping. Everyone wants to know what was in your dowry, because wealth shifts balance in the community. If you brought land, you might suddenly elevate your husband's standing. If you brought little, the whispers might paint you as a burden. Even in villages, envy slithers through the hedges. There's also the bride price, a lesser-known twist. In some regions, the groom's family paid the brides, acknowledging the labor and value of the daughter they lost. Imagine the contradictions. Sometimes your body is seen as a gift, sometimes as an expense, sometimes as an investment. Through it all, you stand at the center, but rarely as the one making decisions. Still, resilience surfaces. Women remembered their dowries and pressed their rights, even in courts. One scandalous aside tells of a 15th-century widow who dragged her husband's kin to court for withholding her dowry lands, insisting she would not be robbed of her living. Her boldness was unusual, but it shows that women could use the very system that bound them as a lever for survival. As the firelight flickers against the walls, you tighten your grip on that little purse. The clink of coins may decide more about your fate than your prayers or your smile. Wealth travels through women, but not always to them, and with each contract signed, you feel the invisible lines tying you tighter to the expectations of family, community, and law. The crackle of a fire greets you, its heat pressing close as you stoop to stir a pot hanging over the hearth. Married life isn't romance but routine, and the duties of a wife stretch from sunrise until long after dark. You are the hub of the household, the one who spins the threads, both literal and figurative, that keep everything together. Your hands are never still, and neither is your mind. Records confirm that wives were expected to contribute not just domestic labor, but also agricultural and commercial work. In peasant households, you rise early to milk cows, churn butter, feed pigs, and weed fields. In towns, you brew ale, spin yarn, or help run a small family business. Noblewomen, too, were burdened managing large estates, overseeing servants, and keeping accounts when husbands were away. A medieval wife was, in truth, an unpaid manager of everything that sustained life. You might be surprised to learn that brewing ale was once a woman's trade. Alewives, as they were called, dominated the market in many English towns during the early Middle Ages. With buckets, barrels, and bubbling vats, women transformed grain into the daily drink of peasants and lords alike. But by the 15th century, men increasingly took over brewing, pushing women out of a profitable craft. One can almost hear the shift in tone. Ale once symbolized a woman's skill, later mocked in plays and sermons as foolish or corrupt. The scent in your nostrils is a mix of wood smoke, boiling cabbage, and wool damp from the wash. Your back aches from bending, lifting, and scrubbing. Children tug at your skirts, demanding food or comfort. A husband's voice calls from the field, expecting his dinner ready even when your arms tremble with exhaustion. You smooth your apron and push through, because that is what's required. Arguments split along whether medieval women had separate spheres of work. Some scholars argue that the home was distinctly feminine and the fields masculine, while others insist that the boundaries blurred constantly. Women brewed, sold, spun, and tended. Men baked, cooked, and even cared for children when needed. The reality seems messy partnership shaped by survival more than ideology. There are oddities tucked into the routine. One quirky detail. Medieval law sometimes allowed a wife to act as her husband's feme sole in business, meaning she could sign contracts or trade in her own name if granted permission. A rare sliver of autonomy, yet always conditional, always framed by a man's allowance. And then there are the small rebellions. A wife who skimmed a little cream from the milk to barter at the market. Another who forgot to hand over every coin she earned selling eggs. Household work wasn't only duty, it offered hidden chances to carve out slivers of independence, even if tiny and fragile. In your ears, the rhythm of daily tasks becomes a kind of music. The clatter of pots, the creak of the spinning wheel, the soft thud of bread dough against the board. It's relentless, yes, but also sustaining. Without this cadence, families would starve, fields would wither, and even noble halls would collapse under their own weight. And so, you shoulder your tasks with quiet strength. Your life as a wife may be defined by labor that rarely earns praise, but it is also labor without which the world could not turn. As night settles, your body aches, your eyes sting from smoke, but your hearth glows proof that your invisible work has kept everyone alive another day. Your breath quickens in the dim glow of a rushlight, the chamber heavy with the smell of sweat, herbs, and wax. Pregnancy and childbirth in medieval England are not tender stories whispered beside a crib, they are ordeals of flesh and fear. As you lower yourself onto the wooden birthing stool, your knuckles white from gripping the handles, you realize that the very act of bringing life is a gamble with death. Records confirm that maternal mortality was staggeringly high. Some estimates suggest that 1 in 3 women might die in childbirth over the course of their lives. Causes ranged from obstructed labor to puerperal fever, complications no medieval midwife had the tools to prevent. Still, these women carried the knowledge of herbs, prayers, and positioning, and for many, they were the only line of defense against the shadow of death. Here's the curious detail. Childbirth was not a solitary affair. It was a communal event, attended only by women, neighbors, relatives, and the midwife herself. Men were banished from the room, left pacing outside. The chamber became a sealed female world where charms were whispered, holy relics pressed into hands, and candles burned in devotion to saints like Margaret, patroness of childbirth. The air itself thickened with fear and faith. Your senses take in the sharp sting of crushed herbs rubbed onto your temples, the musky scent of beeswax dripping slowly onto the rushes, the sound of women chanting prayers that blur into lullabies. Someone tightens a cord around your waist. Another sprinkles holy water on the threshold to keep demons at bay. Every gesture is both ritual and remedy. No agreement has been reached on whether these childbirth rituals truly gave women a sense of power or were simply desperate attempts to cope with helplessness. Some scholars argue the birthing chamber was a rare, female-dominated space where knowledge and authority were shared. Others suggest it was an illusion of control, since outcomes still hinged on forces no one could master. The debate itself reflects how fragile the balance was between life and loss. Your mind wanders for a second to the wooden cradle waiting nearby, carved roughly but lovingly. You picture swaddled cloth, a babe's tiny fingers curling around your own. But you also hear the silence that might follow, the stillness of a room where cries never come. Women knew both realities too well, and grief was as common as celebration. A scandalous aside drifts from the records. Midwives were sometimes accused of sorcery if births went wrong. Their intimate knowledge of herbs, their muttered charms, their control over life and death, it unsettled male authorities. Imagine being the woman who tried to save lives, only to be whispered about as a witch. Such suspicion shows how fragile your place could be, even in the most essential moments of life. Your body strains again on the stool. sweat dripping down your back, the coarse cloth sticking to your skin. Voices urge you on, prayers rise louder, the midwife's steady hands guiding you, and then release. The air fills with a newborn's cry, sharp and startling against the silence of night. Relief washes over the room, laughter mingling with tears. For now, you've survived, and so has your child. But you know the cycle will repeat. Pregnancy is constant, unrelenting, and your body will be tested again and again. Each birth is a risk, each cradle a fragile hope. In this world, motherhood is both destiny and danger, carried in your very breath. Your arms ache as you cradle an infant, its tiny body warm against your chest while your mind races with dread. Motherhood in medieval England is not a sentimental painting of soft smiles and lullabies. It is a constant negotiation with death. You may have given birth successfully, but the danger has not passed. Babies are fragile, and so are you. Parish rolls reveal shocking mortality. Perhaps 1 in 4 children never survive past their first year. Measles, whooping cough, dysentery, any one of them can sweep through your household and snatch away the child you hold. Even teething, something modern parents barely flinch at, can spiral into infection and fever here. Every cough makes you stiffen, every cry keeps you awake through the damp chill of the night. Here's a peculiar glimpse from the records. Swaddling clothes were used tightly, binding infants' arms and legs straight for months at a time. People believed this prevented crooked limbs. The result? Babies looked more like small wooden bundles than wriggling children, carried in cradles or hung from pegs while mothers worked. You can almost hear the creak of the cradle rocking gently by the hearth, the child inside stiff as a log but oddly secure. The smells of motherhood are sharp in your nose: sour milk, damp cloth, smoke from the fire. Your breasts ache, your body exhausted, yet you rise each dawn to stir the pottage and keep the household alive. Children, if they grow, soon join in the work. A 5-year-old may already carry water or herd geese. Childhood is brief. Responsibility comes quickly. Arguments split along whether medieval mothers were emotionally detached due to high mortality, or whether they grieved as deeply as we do now. Some scholars suggest that when so many children died, affection was restrained, almost guarded. Others insist the flood of lullabies, charms, and memorials carved into church walls proves otherwise. Did mothers steel themselves against loss, or did they love fiercely despite the risk? The debate lingers unresolved. You might be surprised to learn that godparents carried immense importance. They weren't just ceremonial figures at baptism. They were potential guardians, legal witnesses, and spiritual anchors. Choosing them was strategic, weaving your family into a web of obligations. A wealthy godparent might improve your child's prospects, while a poor one might offer loyalty in lean years. The baptism itself carried urgency. Infants were often christened within days, sometimes hours, lest they die unblessed. As you rock your baby, you feel the weight not only of love but of expectation. This child must survive, must one day contribute to the household, must one day repeat this cycle. You whisper a charm against the evil eye, tuck a sprig of rue into the cradle, and pray in silence as bells toll outside. Your ears catch the distant sound of another child crying, your neighbour's, perhaps. You know her grief, too, because loss travels quickly in villages. Women trade remedies, comfort, and quiet sympathy. No one escapes the shadow of infant death, but the bonds of shared motherhood soften its edges. And so you keep rocking, keep feeding, keep whispering prayers. The days blur, marked by cries and chores, by fear and fleeting joy. Motherhood here is not simply nurturing, it is survival, vigilance, and the desperate hope that this fragile flame of life will not be blown out by the winds that stalk every medieval home. Your palms are rough, the skin cracked from endless labor, and as you stretch them out, you see the story of women's work written across them. In medieval England, women's livelihoods spill far beyond the hearth. Whether peasant, townswoman, or noble, your contribution keeps the fragile economy alive, even if the records rarely write your name beside it. Manuscripts show that women's occupations ranged widely: spinning, weaving, brewing, midwifery, baking, dairy work, poultry keeping, market vending. In towns, wives of craftsmen often worked right alongside their husbands, mending shoes, dyeing cloth, or serving customers. In villages, women bent low over strips of farmland, planting peas or gathering sheaves. Their labor wasn't supplemental, it was central. Without women's work, whole households would collapse. One quirky twist lies in the brewing trade. For centuries, ale-making was so closely linked to women that the figure of the alewife became a common sight and sometimes a punchline. Popular plays mocked her for watering down drink, while tavern signs often showed jugs and skirts together. Yet archaeological finds of brewing vats in townhouses confirmed that this was real, profitable labor. Only later, when brewing grew lucrative, did men take over, forcing women back to smaller, riskier work. The air of the market fills your senses: fish sizzling, onions pungent, cloth merchants shouting prices. You stand at a stall with baskets of eggs, haggling with a sharp tongue that belies the modesty expected of you. The coins you collect jingle softly, though whether you keep them or hand them to your husband depends on local custom. For a fleeting moment, the stall is your stage, your voice carrying weight in a space dominated by men. Scholars still argue whether women's contributions to medieval economies have been underestimated because records privilege male trades. Court rolls list John the Butcher or William the Tanner, but often omit wives who cut meat or salted hides alongside them. Some historians insist women's work was hidden in plain sight, unacknowledged yet indispensable. Others counter that women truly were barred from guild structures and meaningful independence. The truth likely lies between, shaped by place and class. Your mind lingers on noblewomen too. When husbands left for war or pilgrimage, wives ran estates hiring labourers, overseeing harvests, even sitting in judgment at manor courts. Letters from noblewomen prove their active management, their signatures sealing contracts, their instructions shaping harvests. Yet chroniclers still framed their authority as temporary, borrowed until the rightful male returned. And there are stranger sidelines. In some towns, women were licensed to sell goods in markets independently, but only certain items, bread, dairy, ale, considered appropriate. A woman hawking iron tools or weapons might face suspicion, even punishment. Gender shaped what you could trade, as though even commerce had a moral code. The sounds of work surround you, the rasp of shears on sheep's wool, the clatter of pots, the snap of thread as a spindle turns. Sweat stings your eyes, but your rhythm doesn't falter. Survival demands it. There is no holiday from toil, no retirement. From childhood to widowhood, women's work is the drumbeat of daily life, invisible yet indispensable. And so, you keep your hands moving, knowing that even if your name never appears in a guild charter or parish record, the survival of your family, and often your entire community, rests in the labor etched deep into your skin. You walk down a muddy lane, skirts hemmed in dirt, the chill of morning mist clinging to your hair. Village life wraps itself around you like a coarse cloak, sometimes comforting, sometimes suffocating. Here, in medieval England, the village is your world. Rarely do you step beyond its fields and hedges, and when you do, your absence is noted. Everyone knows everyone else, and everyone talks. Court rolls demonstrate how tightly knit these communities were. Neighbours testified in disputes over fences, debts, or livestock, and gossip often became evidence. The well is the centre of news, where women gather with buckets, trading tales as freely as they trade herbs. A whispered word can help you find a midwife, or ruin your reputation with a rumour of infidelity. The village thrives on talk as much as on grain. A curious detail lingers in the records. Villagers sometimes fined women for scolding too loudly, branding them common scolds. Imagine being dragged to court simply because your sharp tongue embarrassed a neighbour. In some cases, punishment meant sitting in the cucking stool, a humiliating dunking in the village pond. It's proof that even in the tiniest communities, women's voices were both vital and feared. Your senses soak in the sounds of this world, the steady thud of flails beating grain, the laughter of children chasing hoops, the creak of a cart rolling past with hay piled high. The air smells of wood smoke, dung, and the tang of onions drying for winter. Your hands are never idle spinning by the fire, stirring pottage, or gathering herbs from the hedgerow. Life is communal, practical, endlessly repetitive, but it pulses with its own rhythm. Scholars still debate whether village life granted women more agency than towns or noble estates. Some argue that in small communities, women's work and voices carried more weight because survival depended on cooperation. Others insist that the same intimacy meant stricter surveillance, with every deviation noticed and punished. Did the village empower women as indispensable workers, or silence them through constant scrutiny? The answer slips between both. Odd customs crop up too. On feast days, women join men in dancing around maypoles or racing in games, but only briefly before sliding back into duty. A scandalous aside, in some villages, unmarried women were mocked with ritual charivaris if they refused suitors or behaved outside expectations. Pots and pans clanged outside their doors at night, a noisy reminder that the community never let you forget your place. As evening falls, you feel the warmth of shared spaces. Neighbors lend a hand at harvest, women swap bread or rush light wicks, and stories pass from hearth to hearth. The village is harsh, but it's also woven from threads of interdependence. Alone, you could not survive. Together, you endure. And so you tread the same muddy lanes day after day, your life bound to the hum of a community that shapes your every step, word, and breath. Your footsteps echo against cold stone floors, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax and rushes, as you step into the life of a noblewoman. Unlike the village lanes, here you walk through halls lined with tapestries, their bright threads depicting hunts, saints, and battles. Yet don't mistake this for idleness. Your duties as a noblewoman are as consuming as any peasant's, only dressed in velvet sleeves instead of wool. Chronicles make clear that noblewomen were entrusted with managing vast estates when husbands or fathers were away. They supervised bailiffs, arranged leases, and kept ledgers of harvests and rents. A noblewoman could decide when to collect fines, when to repair a mill, even when to summon peasants for service. Your quill scratches across parchment as you sign orders, your seal pressed into warm wax with a decisive hand. Here's a curious footnote. Some noblewomen even commanded castles during sieges. Letters survive from Lady Nicola de la Haye, who in the early 13th century defended Lincoln Castle against rebels. Imagine the sight of a woman at the battlements, issuing commands while arrows hissed overhead. Such women were rare, but their stories prove that noble authority could stretch far beyond the hearth. Still, the expectations press heavily. Your days are filled with supervising kitchens, seamstresses, laundresses, and pages. Meals must be planned, accounts tallied, visitors entertained. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the sharp tang of ink as you move between hall and chamber, a constant balance of hospitality and bureaucracy. You are not only a wife, you are steward, hostess, and strategist. Scholars still argue whether noblewomen's power was genuine or only temporary. Was it real authority, respected in its own right, or merely a placeholder until a male heir or husband returned? Some evidence suggests women exercised considerable autonomy, especially widows, who might manage estates for decades. Yet legal frameworks always framed them as exceptions, not models. Your ears catch the soft sound of minstrels rehearsing in the gallery, their lute strings echoing faintly as servants rush below with pitchers of ale. Outside, horses stamp in the stables, and messengers arrive with wax-sealed letters. You move through it all with practiced composure, every gesture signaling dignity and order. There are odd sidelines to your power. Noble women sometimes acted as patrons of poets or nuns, funding manuscripts or chapels in their names. Such acts stitched their legacies into spiritual and cultural memory. Yet you also sense the precariousness, one political shift, one accusation of disloyalty, and your velvet sleeves could not protect you. A scandalous aside reaches from the annals. Noblewomen occasionally faced accusations of poisoning rivals, whispered tales of plots spun in chambers lit by candlelight. Whether true or not, these rumors reveal how unsettling female influence could seem in a patriarchal court. The same hands that embroidered altar cloths were imagined to mix deadly draughts. As night falls, you retreat to your chamber, fire crackling against stone walls, the weight of your mantle still pressing on your shoulders. You may live among silks and jewels, but your responsibilities are no lighter. Power here is real, yes, but it is fragile, borrowed, and constantly tested by the shifting winds of politics and family. Your crown feels heavier than you imagined, pressing against your temples as you move through a crowded hall thick with incense and whispers. Life as a queen in medieval England glitters with jewels but cuts like iron. You are at once a symbol of grace and a pawn in politics, praised in songs yet cornered by intrigue. Every gesture you make, lifting a goblet, choosing a gown, even the way you smile is read as a signal of power or weakness. Royal charters reveal that queens were not merely ornamental. They often held lands in their own right, receiving dower estates that provided revenue and staff. Some, like Eleanor of Aquitaine, wielded authority across multiple kingdoms, negotiating treaties and even leading military campaigns. When kings were absent or incapacitated, queens sometimes governed as regents, their names inked on decrees that shaped the realm. You might be surprised to learn that queenship could also mean active involvement in diplomacy. Marriages were political alliances, linking England to France, Castile, or Flanders. The Queen's letters, often written in elegant French or Latin, carried weight across Europe. A single phrase in a Queen's correspondence might tilt negotiations, though chroniclers rarely give her full credit. The sensory world of the court surrounds you now. The scent of spiced wine and roasting peacocks lingers in the hall, while minstrels pluck lutes in a rhythm that masks the murmured plotting of nobles. Jewels press cold against your skin, their glitter dazzling, but the air is hot with candle smoke and the restless shuffle of courtiers' boots. You smile, though you feel their eyes measuring your every breath. Arguments split along how much influence queens truly held. Some historians claim they were constrained, used only as pawns to bear heirs and secure alliances. Others point to records of petitions addressed directly to queens, their signatures on grants, their interventions in justice, suggesting real channels of authority. Was a queen's power authentic or only tolerated so long as it served the king's will? No agreement unravels the paradox completely. Odd corners of history remind you of how perilous queenship could be. One scandalous aside: Anne Boleyn, centuries later, would be executed for charges of adultery and treason, accusations most modern scholars view as politically motivated. Earlier queens, too, faced exile, annulment, or rumors of witchcraft. To wear a crown was to live perpetually one misstep away from ruin. In your ears the hall buzzes with flattery and deception. A courtier kneels too deeply, another glances too long. Behind you, ladies in waiting whisper, while scribes sharpen quills to record the day's business. You feel both the center of this orbit and its captive, your freedom defined by walls of ceremony. Night descends, and you retreat to a chamber draped in velvet, perfumed with rosewater. But even here, whispers slip through the curtains, plots, betrayals, ambitions. The crown glitters beside your bed, its jewels catching the firelight. A reminder that while you may rule in splendor, your fate remains as precarious as any peasant's, only with far higher stakes. Your lips move slowly in prayer, the scent of incense thick in the air, while the dim glow of candles flickers against stone arches. Religion saturates every moment of medieval life, and for women it offers both comfort and confinement. From cradle to grave, your days are threaded through with devotion, crossing yourself at sunrise, whispering Ave Marias while spinning wool, lighting candles for saints who hold your fragile hopes. Ecclesiastical records demonstrate how deeply the Church reached into daily rhythms. Holy days punctuate the year, pulling you away from fields into processions and masses. Priests monitor confessions, bishops regulate morality, and parish registers mark baptisms, marriages, and burials. For women, religion isn't just belief, it's surveillance and expectation, a constant reminder of obedience. You may be surprised to learn that women often formed religious guilds of their own. These confraternities gathered for prayer, charity, and mutual aid. In some towns, women's guilds pooled funds to provide candles for altars or dowries for poor girls. They weren't clerical, but they gave women a visible role in the spiritual and social fabric of the parish. The sensory world of faith is powerful. Bells toll at dawn, their clang echoing across rooftops. The waxy smoke of candles clings to your cloak as you kneel. The stone beneath your knees is cold, yet strangely grounding. Hymns rise above you, layered voices filling the nave until it feels as though heaven itself presses down into the room. Scholars bicker over whether religion offered women empowerment or further restriction. Some point to how devotion let women carve respected roles as visionaries, patrons, even local saints. Others stress how sermons thundered against women as temptresses, urging silence and obedience. Did faith lift women or chain them more firmly? The debate hums unresolved, like a low note beneath the choir's chant. There are curious details hidden in parish life. A scandalous aside, in some villages, women were fined for gossiping at the church door during Mass. Imagine being hauled before a court, not for heresy, but for chattering too loudly when you should have been reverent. It shows how even the threshold of the sacred became a stage for judging women's behavior. And then there are the relics. You might press your lips to a bone said to belong to a saint, or wear a pilgrim badge pinned near your heart. Faith is physical as much as spiritual, the texture of rosary beads in your fingers, the bitter tang of holy bread on your tongue, the smooth chill of a font against your palm as you bless yourself. Night falls, and you extinguish your candle. But prayers continue in murmurs beneath your breath. Religion is never far away. It shapes your work, your family, your reputation, your very identity. Whether it shields you or shackles you, faith is the air you breathe, the silence you sleep in, and the words you wake to again at dawn. Your fingers stain faintly with ink as you trace letters across a manuscript page, the quiet hum of psalms vibrating through the convent walls. Life as a nun in medieval England is not simply a retreat from the world. It is another form of work, ritual, and sometimes scandal. The convent offers women a rare alternative to marriage, but it comes with its own strict rhythms and hidden tensions. Monastic records reveal that convents were centers of literacy and management. Nuns copied manuscripts, tended gardens, brewed ale, and oversaw estates granted by patrons. Some even managed schools for girls, passing on the ability to read prayers or accounts. Within these walls, women could wield authority that few outside ever tasted, though always under the distant shadow of male bishops and priors. A curious twist lies in the way convents became social hubs. Wealthy families sent daughters not only for piety, but also for education or safety during wars. Some girls stayed only temporarily before returning to secular life, their cloistered years functioning almost like a finishing school. Others, once vowed, lived cloistered lives that stretched into decades. You can almost hear the mix of laughter and sighs in the dormitories women bound together, for better or worse. Your senses sharpen in this cloistered space. The air smells of beeswax and fresh herbs from the physic garden. Candlelight dances on painted saints, staring solemnly from walls. The scratch of quills fills the scriptorium, broken by the occasional cough or whispered correction. Outside, geese honk in the yard, and the bell rings at fixed hours, slicing the day into prayers. Historians still debate whether convents liberated or confined women. On one hand, they offered shelter, education, and even leadership. On the other, vows of chastity and obedience tied women tightly to a patriarchal church. Some argue that abbesses, who ruled over communities and estates, wielded near-feudal power. Others counter that even the most powerful abbess could be overruled by a bishop's decree. Odd stories cling to convent walls. A scandalous aside, visitation records occasionally accuse nuns of feasting too richly, dancing or sneaking out to meet lovers. One report from the 14th century scolds a convent for keeping hunting dogs. Such tales, whether exaggerated or true, show how suspicion followed women even in sacred spaces. Yet devotion pulses here too. Some nuns wrote mystical visions that stirred both awe and suspicion, their words claiming intimacy with the divine. You run your hand along the vellum of such a text, the ink raised like veins, carrying a woman's voice across centuries. As dusk descends, the convent grows quiet. The last prayers murmured under breath as women retreat to narrow beds. For a moment, the world beyond the walls feels distant, muffled. Here, within these cloisters, you are both confined and sheltered, bound by vows yet strangely empowered by community. Your shadow flickers on the wall as firelight dances, the air thick with the smell of herbs and smoke. In medieval England, the line between healing charms and forbidden sorcery is perilously thin, and women often find themselves walking it with bare feet. A whispered prayer over an herb bundle might soothe a fever, or it might spark a neighbor's suspicion that you've made a pact with darker forces. Court records demonstrate how ordinary practices became dangerous when fear grew sharp. Women gathered herbs like rue, sage, and fennel, muttering blessings as they tied them into bundles. These same herbs appear in recipe books of physicians, but when a woman without formal training used them, the act could be called witchcraft. Local courts sometimes fined or punished women for charms that seemed too effective or too strange. Here's a curious sideline. People believed witches could steal milk from cows by muttering spells. In some villages, butter that refused to churn was blamed on a woman's envy. Imagine the gossip. One neighbor accusing another of keeping demons in the shape of a cat, just because the butter wouldn't thicken. The ordinary churn became a stage for fear and blame. Your senses absorb the atmosphere of suspicion. The scent of sage smoulders in the hearth, mingling with wood smoke. A dog barks outside, its sound too sharp, and suddenly someone mutters that animals sense evil. Your skin prickles with unease as you hear footsteps shuffle past the door, voices dropping into whispers. In this world, being different is dangerous. Scholars bicker over how widespread witch trials really were in medieval England. Unlike the ferocious persecutions of the later early modern period, evidence suggests accusations here were more localized, tied to disputes or misfortunes. Was the fear of witches a constant looming terror, or only an occasional flare of panic? The historical record leaves space for argument. Odd contradictions abound. Priests themselves sometimes prescribed charms, prayers against storms or fever blessing, bread or salt, to protect the household. Yet if the same charm came from a woman at the village edge, it reeked of danger. A scandalous aside, one midwife was accused of witchcraft simply because too many babies in her care survived, her success itself fueling suspicion. In your ears, the crackle of the fire seems louder now, punctuated by muttered prayers. You feel the rough twine of an herb bundle in your hand, the prickle of dried rosemary brushing your palm. Is it healing or heresy? The boundary shifts depending on who is watching. As night deepens, you realize how precarious this life is. The same knowledge that makes you valuable herbs, charms, remedies can also condemn you. In a world where milk sours, crops fail, and babies die, someone must be blamed. Too often that someone is a woman like you. The iron bite of a manacle presses into your wrist, cold against skin already rubbed raw. Law and punishment in medieval England weigh heavily, and for women, justice rarely bends in their favor. The system is not blind, it is tilted, steeped in assumptions about gender, morality, and reputation. Legal roles reveal that women were tried for theft, scolding, harboring fugitives, or violating market regulations. They might also be summoned for sexual misconduct or bad behavior, vague terms that gave neighbors power to drag them before manorial courts. The punishments were meant to be public, visible lessons carved into memory: fines, beatings, the cucking stool, or humiliation on the pillory. For crimes judged serious, theft of livestock, arson, or murder, women risked the gallows. One curious twist: women sometimes claimed Benefit of belly. If pregnant, they could delay execution until after the child was born, and occasionally their sentence was commuted altogether. Jurors, usually men, would appoint a panel of matrons to inspect and confirm pregnancy. Imagine standing there, your life hinging on a group of women deciding whether they felt quickening within your belly. The sensory world of punishment is harsh. The reek of unwashed bodies in the stocks, the jeering laughter of villagers, the sting of rotten vegetables hurled at your face. If ducked in the cucking stool, icy pond water chokes your throat, while onlookers cheer or jeer. A single slip of the tongue, too much gossip, or the wrong quarrel could land you here. Scholars still argue whether women faced harsher justice than men, or simply different forms. Some suggest courts were quick to fine or shame women for behavior tolerated in men, particularly speech. Others note that petty crimes by women were sometimes treated leniently, since their labor was indispensable to households. Was the law harsher on women, or just skewed differently? No consensus emerges. A scandalous aside emerges from London records. Some brothel keepers, often women, were prosecuted more severely than the men who profited alongside them. Their reputations blackened permanently, while their male clients melted back into anonymity. It shows how quickly morality courts branded women as permanent offenders while shielding men with silence. Your ears hear the clang of the village bell summoning people to witness punishment. Children perch on fences, men elbow each other for a better view, and women watch silently, perhaps seeing their own reflection in your humiliation. The ritual of punishment is not only about guilt, it is about enforcing order, reminding everyone of their place. Yet women could also wield the law strategically. Widows defended dowry rights in courts, wives accused abusive husbands of cruelty, and market women protested unfair taxes. Though limited, the system allowed flickers of agency. Records describe women petitioning the king directly, their pleas sometimes answered with pardons or protections. It was a narrow channel, but it proved women understood the rules well enough to bend them when survival demanded it. And then there are darker punishments. Treason by a woman could be judged as petty treason, the murder of a husband or master. The sentence was burning at the stake, fiery, brutal, and deliberately theatrical. Your imagination recoils from the smoke, the crackle, the screams. Even here, gender-shaped justice. Where men were hanged, women burned, as if their crimes threatened not just order, but the very foundation of patriarchy. Odd fragments from the margins complicate the story. Some women accused of crimes escaped altogether by running into churches and claiming sanctuary. They might remain there, huddled by the altar, surviving on scraps, until they agreed to exile. Sanctuary turns sacred space into last refuge, where the law paused long enough for a woman to breathe. As night settles in the village, you sit by the fire, wrists aching from rope burns. The threat of justice lingers like smoke in your hair. For women in medieval England, punishment is not just about crime, it is about reputation, gender, and the fragile line between survival and disgrace. Every word spoken, every step taken, feels like it might echo in a courtroom someday. The rattle of a pouch filled with dried leaves greets your ear as you rummage through baskets of herbs. Medicine in medieval England is as much about scent and superstition as it is about science. You, like countless women before you, carry knowledge in your fingertips: how to steep chamomile for fevers, how to grind willow bark for pain, how to pack wounds with honey to keep them clean. Healing belongs to the household long before it belongs to physicians, and it often begins in women's hands. Household accounts indicate that women acted as the first line of medical care. A wife or mother mixed ointments, bound broken limbs, and comforted the sick with prayers whispered over steaming bowls of broth. The work was unpaid but vital, the difference between a recovery and a funeral. Even noble estates relied on female knowledge, with kitchens doubling as apothecaries stocked with rosemary, sage, and vinegar. A curious case comes from monastic gardens. Nuns cultivated physic herbs in carefully tended plots, passing on recipes that blended prayer with practical knowledge. Some even kept written collections of remedies, where charms sat alongside ingredients like garlic, rue, or poppy seeds. Imagine a parchment where a prayer to Saint Apollonia for toothache is written right next to a recipe for clove oil. It's a fusion of the sacred and the scientific. The sensory landscape is vivid. You smell crushed mint leaves rubbed between fingers, pungent garlic hung in braids, vinegar sharp enough to sting your nose. Mortars pound rhythmically in kitchens, while smoke from healing salves rises, sticky with resin. Patients groan nearby, their breaths shallow, while you mutter words meant to soothe body and soul alike. Historians still debate whether women healers were trusted pillars of their communities or tolerated only until male-trained physicians arrived. Some argue that village midwives and herbwives provided indispensable care, valued by neighbors and even called to noble halls. Others emphasize how easily these same women became scapegoats if healing failed, accused of malpractice or witchcraft. The tension never fully resolves. You might be surprised to learn that professional physicians, trained in universities, often dismissed women's remedies as folk cures, yet many borrowed them in practice. Recipes from learned texts include the same herbs village women used, though wrapped in Latin phrases and Galenic theory. The difference wasn't in the medicine itself, but in who was allowed to claim authority over it. A scandalous aside drifts from London records. One woman healer was accused of stealing patients from a male barber, surgeon. Her treatments apparently worked better, and jealousy, not science, dragged her before court. The charge wasn't fraud, but simply that she practiced medicine without license, an offense of status more than of skill. The feel of your work lingers in your hands. Resin sticks under your nails. The coarse fabric of poultices scratches your palms, and the faint burn of mustard seed rubs into your skin. Healing is tactile. Immediate, you don't need theories of humors when you can see a wound closing or a fever breaking. And yet, risk always shadows the healer. If a child dies despite your efforts, whispers spread. If your remedies work too well, envy festers. Your place is as fragile as the health you guard. One season you are praised as a miracle worker, the next, condemned as dangerous. As you lay out herbs to dry on a rush mat, your thoughts wander. Healing is not simply a craft, it is survival, hope, and sometimes peril. You know that what you pass down to daughters and neighbors will outlive you, even if your name never does. The smell of sage fills the room, warm and earthy, while outside the bell tolls again, reminding you that in this world, every cure, every prayer, every whispered charm is a wager against the grave. The scratch of wool against your skin makes you shift uncomfortably, the fabric coarse and itchy even beneath a linen shift. Clothing in medieval England is never just fabric, it is identity, a statement of class, piety, and gender. The layers you wear are as much about what you are allowed to show as what you must hide. Guild inventories reveal how carefully clothing was regulated by law. Sumptuary statutes dictated who could wear silk, ermine, or certain colors, tying fabric to social rank. A merchant's wife might be fined for daring to wear fur reserved for nobles. A peasant girl's dress is plain wool dyed with cheap plant pigments, while a lady's gown might sweep the floor in deep crimson or azure, its hue alone announcing her family's wealth. Clothes become a visible map of society, every stitch, a signpost of where you stand. One curious note from wardrobe accounts. Medieval people loved layering. Even peasants wore tunics over shifts, with belts, hoods, and sometimes a cloak if winter bit hard. Wealthier women draped themselves in multiple gowns, sleeves trailing so long they brushed the ground. Imagine walking across a muddy yard while trying not to soak your brocaded hems, a daily battle between fashion and practicality. The sensory experience is unavoidable. The sharp tang of lye lingers on freshly washed cloth. The greasy feel of lanolin clings to wool, and the faint perfume of lavender sachets is tucked between layers to keep moths away. Your skin itches constantly, not just from fleas but from the rough weave of the cheapest fabrics. In noble chambers, the rustle of silk is a luxury sound, signaling status as much as comfort. Arguments still swirl among scholars about how restrictive sumptuary laws actually were. Some insist these laws were rarely enforced, more moral sermons than binding regulations. Others argue that enforcement was real and carried symbolic weight. Public shaming, fines, and gossip kept people in line. Did peasants truly fear fines for wearing a fur trim, or did they quietly ignore the rules in back villages? The evidence is tantalizing but incomplete. You might be surprised to learn that head coverings were nearly universal. Married women covered their hair with veils, wimples, or hoods. Loose hair suggested youth, virginity, or worse, immodesty. In villages, a linen kerchief tied tight kept smoke and sweat out of the way. In courts, elaborate veils and hennins rose like towers, framing faces in geometric splendor. A woman's head was not only clothed, it was coded. A scandalous aside lingers in the chronicles. One London woman was accused of dressing above her station, her flamboyant gowns sparking enough outrage to reach civic courts. It wasn't theft or violence that drew punishment, just the audacity of appearing too wealthy, as if cloth itself could destabilize the hierarchy. Your ears catch the soft swish of fabric as women move around you, the creak of leather shoes on floorboards, the jingle of girdle bells, the snap of a clasp closing at the shoulder. Clothing speaks through sound as well as sight. Even the smell of smoke, embedded in cloaks, tells stories of where you've been and what work you've done. And beyond regulation and ritual, clothes hold memory. A veil passed down from mother to daughter, a cloak mended again and again, a pair of shoes patched until their leather thins. For noble women, jewels stitched into sleeves glitter at feasts. For peasants, the simplest belt may be their most precious possession, binding more than fabric, binding identity itself. As you loosen your garments by the hearth, the rough shift clings to your damp skin. Fashion has marked you, whether you wanted it to or not. In this world, what you wear is never just your choice, it is the reflection of rank, expectation, and the unyielding gaze of those who measure worth by cloth. The savory steam of pottage curls into your nostrils, thick with leeks, beans, and barley simmered for hours in a soot-blackened pot. Food in medieval England is not only sustenance, but a vivid marker of class, fortune, and festivity. What you eat or fail to eat says more about your place in the world than any parchment could. Household accounts make plain the divide. A peasant's daily fare is humble and repetitive. Dark rye bread, pottage, and ale. Meat is a rarity, perhaps bacon salted and hung from rafters, or scraps of offal stewed when a pig is slaughtered once a year. By contrast, the noble table groans beneath roasted venison, swan, and pies, stuffed with spices from distant ports. Food is hierarchy on a plate. One curious note lies in how medieval kitchens loved spices. Pepper, cinnamon, and saffron were prized, not only for flavor but as symbols of wealth. Imagine a banquet where your tongue tingles with cloves and nutmeg while peasants outside the manor chew tough crusts. Spices traveled thousands of miles, passing through caravans and ships, until they glittered in noble kitchens as luxury dust sprinkled over meat. Your senses are flooded in both settings. In the cottage, the air is thick with smoke from damp firewood, mingling with the sour tang of ale. The bread is heavy, your jaw aching as you chew, but the warmth fills your belly. In the hall, the smell of roasted goose mingles with almond milk sauces, torches sputtering grease into the air while dogs bark at scraps tossed to the floor. The contrast is dizzying, two worlds divided by what is served at mealtime. Scholars disagree about whether the medieval diet was healthier for peasants than for nobles. Some argue that simple grains, beans, and vegetables provided balanced nutrition, while the rich clogged themselves with meat and spice. Others counter that famine, bad harvests, and disease ravaged peasants' bodies, leaving them far weaker than the wealthy. Was survival better with bread and onions or venison and claret? The answer depends on which year and which household you step into. You might be surprised to learn that fasting shaped the calendar as much as feasting. The church imposed dozens of meatless days each year, pushing fish, eggs, and dairy into prominence. This meant eels, herring, and salted cod became staples, even for inland villages. Monasteries thrived on fish ponds, shimmering with carp and pike bred for holy diets. A world of flavors was built not only by appetite but by religious law. And then there are the oddities. A scandalous aside. Cooks sometimes gilded roasted peacocks in gold leaf, reattaching the feathers so the bird appeared to strut back to life on the platter. Guests gasped and applauded, their fingers greasy with wealth. Meanwhile, in the village, a woman might boil nettles into soup, grateful simply to have something green after a long winter. The sounds of dining carry into your ears. The crack of bread crusts, the slurp of broth, the clatter of trenchers scraped clean. At noble feasts, music swells, dice rattle on tables, and laughter rolls as goblets clink. In cottages, the sound is quieter, the scrape of wooden spoons, the tired sigh of children, the soft crackle of a log splitting. Both meals end the same way, bellies filled enough to keep going, though never equally. Oddly, waste was its own marker of power. Nobles tossed scraps to dogs, or gave leftovers to servants and the poor. Peasants, by contrast, stretched every morsel, bread loaves cut thin, bones boiled twice. The very act of waste became privilege, while thrift was survival. As night deepens, you lick grease or perhaps barley broth from your lips, belly warming slowly. Whether rich or poor, food marks the rhythm of life, the promise that tomorrow might be endured. In this world, what lies on your plate defines not just your hunger, but your place in the order of things. The road stretches before you, uneven and muddy, lined with hedges that rustle in the wind. Travel in medieval England is slow, dangerous, and exhausting, but it is also one of the few chances for women to step beyond the narrow circle of village or manor life. Whether you walk to market, follow a pilgrim route, or ride as part of a noble household, the act of moving across the land shapes how you see yourself and how others see you. Manorial roles indicate that women travelled more often than we might assume. Peasant wives trudged to nearby towns to sell eggs, ale, or cloth, walking miles with baskets balanced on their hips. Noblewomen journeyed between estates, escorted by servants and sometimes armed guards. And then there were pilgrims women of every class setting out to shrines in hopes of healing, forgiveness, or adventure. One curious detail comes from Canterbury. Pilgrimage records show that women made up a significant share of the throngs walking toward the shrine of Thomas Becket. Some travelled barefoot as penance, others carried offerings wrapped in cloth. Imagine the scene, a line of weary travellers, women muttering rosaries as they shuffle forward, their breath clouding in the cold morning air. Your senses are alive on the road. The stink of manure rises from fields you pass, the rough strap of your sandals rubs blisters into your feet, and the jingling of church bells from a distant village promises rest ahead. You hear voices trading stories, tales of miracles, rumours of bandits, songs meant to make the miles pass faster. Travel is weary, but it is never silent. Scholars still argue whether travel expanded women's autonomy or reinforced dependence. On one hand, pilgrimages and markets let women move independently, forming bonds with strangers and glimpsing wider worlds. On the other, most journeys required permission, escorts, or were framed by religious obligation, not personal freedom. Was the road liberating, or simply another duty walked under watchful eyes? The debate lingers, much like the dust clinging to your skirts. You might be surprised to learn that women sometimes undertook international journeys. Queens crossed seas to marry foreign kings. Merchant wives joined husbands in trading ports. Even a few English nuns travelled to continental convents. The Channel crossing was perilous. Ships stank of fish and tar. Waves crashed over decks, and prayers to St. Nicholas, patron of sailors, filled the salty air. Yet the fact remains, women did travel, even if chroniclers rarely recorded their footsteps. A scandalous aside appears in records of pardons. Some women disguised themselves as men to travel safely. Dressed in hose and tunic, they slipped through towns without harassment. Discovery meant danger, But the very act reveals how strongly some women desired mobility in a world that tried to tether them. There are hazards at every step. Bandits haunt the woods, storms sweep across open fields, and illness lurks in crowded inns. One wrong turn can leave you stranded in marshland, mud sucking at your shoes. And yet, shrines beckon with promises. A drop of oil from St. Thomas's lamp. A glimpse of relics said to heal blindness. A badge pinned proudly to your cloak proving you made the journey. The sensory clash is striking. In a bustling inn, the smell of ale and sweat overwhelms you, the clatter of dice shakes tables, and men laugh too loudly at your expense. On the road again, silence stretches, broken only by birdsong and the crunch of gravel beneath boots. Sometimes the monotony is worse than the danger, your mind drifting as hedgerows blur into sameness. And yet, arrival makes the hardship worth it. You kneel at a shrine, candles flickering before jeweled reliquaries, the press of pilgrims around you. Relief floods your tired limbs, not just spiritual but physical, because travel has brought you somewhere new, somewhere beyond your daily confines. For a moment, the world feels wider, and so do you. As you turn back toward home, a badge pinned to your cloak glints in the fading light. The journey has left marks on your feet, your hands, and perhaps even your heart. Travel is never easy, but it carries a whisper of freedom, one road at a time. The clink of pennies in your hand feels both thrilling and precarious, a reminder that in medieval England, money is rarely yours to keep. Markets buzz with energy, filled with shouting vendors, jangling purses, and the smells of fish, leather, and spices. For women, these spaces are opportunities, small windows to earn, barter, and carve a slice of independence. But they are also battlegrounds, where every transaction is watched and judged. Guild records demonstrate that women frequently engaged in trade. Wives of craftsmen often worked beside their husbands, selling cloth, bread, or ale. Widows inherited their late husbands' businesses and sometimes thrived, running shops with their own names on the accounts. Even peasant women could sell surplus eggs, butter, or herbs in weekly markets, their coins helping keep households afloat. The market stall became a stage where women's voices carried weight. One curious detail: London's civic laws occasionally granted women femme sole status, allowing them to buy, sell, and sue in their own right, so long as they lived separately from their husbands. It was rare but striking, a loophole that recognized women as independent traders when survival demanded it. Imagine the sight: a woman behind her stall of candles or cloth, signing her name onto a contract while men grumbled at the precedent. Your senses are alive in the marketplace. The air is thick with roasting meat and pungent cheese. You feel the rough wood of your stall beneath your palms, hear the thud of hooves as carts jostle through the square, and flinch at the sharp cries of vendors touting wares. Children dart between legs, dogs snatch at scraps, and a bell tolls from the church tower above, reminding everyone that commerce must end before prayers. Historians disagree on how much freedom markets truly gave women. Some argue that they provided rare independence, with records showing women suing debtors, collecting rent, or defending stalls. Others insist that these freedoms were fragile, always vulnerable to guild restrictions or male relatives stepping in. Was the market a genuine avenue of agency, or just a tolerated necessity? The evidence points both ways. You might be surprised to learn that women were often fined for unfair measures. If a loaf was too small, or ale watered down, authorities pounced. These fines were not only about honesty but about control, reminding women that their presence in trade was conditional. A woman's mistake was moralized more quickly than a man's, as if female traders carried double the burden of virtue. And then there are the oddities. One scandalous aside: a London widow was accused of cornering the market in fish, hoarding eels to sell them at inflated prices. The case was treated almost like treason against the city, proof of how fiercely people guarded access to food. Women who thrived in trade often walked a fine line between respect and resentment. The sounds of bargaining fill your ears, coins dropping into purses, voices haggling over a penny's difference, laughter erupting when a joke slips between strangers. Yet underneath is tension, the knowledge that one false move, one accusation of cheating, could unravel your livelihood. For noblewomen, money looked different. They managed estates, oversaw rents, and occasionally loaned funds at interest, though always under the guise of family duty. Their ledgers show precise entries: who owed wheat, who paid in chickens, which acres yielded rents. Even wealthier women were rarely independent in the modern sense, but their grasp of accounts proved sharper than stereotypes suggest. As dusk draws near, you gather your stall, counting coins by the last light of the sun. The pennies are warm from your hand, but they feel fragile, easily taken by a husband, a tax, or a sudden misfortune. Still, for this moment, you hold them, and with them, the smallest spark of agency in a world determined to measure your worth. The faint strum of a lute drifts through the smoky air, weaving with laughter and chatter. Art, music, and storytelling seep into medieval life as deeply as pottage or prayer. For women, these cultural threads are both limits and opportunities. Some weave beauty into cloth, some carry tales in their voices, and some leave marks in manuscripts or songs that echo long after their names fade. Parish inventories reveal women donated embroidered altar cloths, painted panels, and finely sewn vestments to churches. These were not merely decoration but offerings of devotion and skill, stitched with prayers in every thread. A woman's hand might never sign a charter, but it could leave bright silk winding across the shoulders of a priest, visible proof of piety and artistry. One curious detail comes from domestic tapestries. Women stitched wall hangings that told stories, scenes of hunts, saints, or romances, turning wool and linen into chronicles of daily life. These embroideries were more than ornament. They preserved memory, broadcasting family identity across generations. A child might learn his ancestry not from a book, but from the woven figures above the hearth. The sensory world is alive with music. You hear the twang of harp strings, the thump of a drum made from stretched hide, and the shrill whistle of a pipe. In taverns, women join in ballads, their voices rough but heartfelt, carrying tales of lost loves or cheeky jokes. On feast days, minstrels play in great halls while noblewomen dance, sleeves swirling like banners. Even in villages, a fiddle could make tired feet spin beneath the maypole. Scholars bicker over whether women created art primarily in private, unseen spaces, or whether they had more public recognition than we assume. Some argue that embroidery and song were dismissed as craft rather than art, undervaluing female creativity. Others note that chronicles and records occasionally praise women as patrons, poets, or even performers. The truth slips between categories, shaped by what survived on parchment and what faded in the air. You might be surprised to learn that women sometimes performed as minstrels or jongleurs, though not always with respect. Records mention female musicians entertaining at feasts, yet clerics frowned upon them, warning that women on stage tempted men to sin. Still, their voices rang out in halls, proof that music carried women's presence even into male-dominated spaces. And then come the oddities. A scandalous aside tells of a 15th-century woman accused of teaching bawdy songs to apprentices, tunes so popular they spread across taverns like wildfire. The authorities tried to stamp them out, but the melodies lingered in ears long after the sermons ended. Art isn't only seen or heard, it's felt. Your fingertips brush colored threads, rough wool softened with silk, your needle pricking skin as you stitch. The smell of beeswax warms a manuscript page as you copy a prayer, your hand cramping but steady. In each act, creation spills quietly into a world that often denies your name but cannot erase your work. Storytelling, too, belongs to women. Around hearths, mothers spin tales of saints, monsters, or local ghosts. Children listen wide-eyed, their imaginations shaped by voices that will never appear in chronicles. These stories carry moral lessons, warnings, and humor, oral art, as vital as any painted panel. And when ballads drift across villages, Verses sung by women help preserve history in melodies that outlive parchment. As evening falls, the lute fades, but the echo remains. Art, music, and storytelling may not grant women fame, but they infuse every corner of life with meaning. You may never sign your name to a canvas or a book, yet your stitches, your songs, your tales ripple outward, lasting far longer than the firelight in which they were born. Your feet press into damp grass as drums thud in the distance. Festivals and holidays break the monotony of medieval life, sweeping whole communities into rhythms of music, food, and prayer. For women, these days are moments of delight, obligation, and sometimes humiliation, all tangled together in the turning calendar of the year. Church registers reveal that nearly a third of the medieval calendar was marked by feast or fast. Candlemas, Easter, Pentecost, Corpus Christi, All Saints each carried its own rituals and processions. Villages pulsed with activity as bells rang, banners unfurled, and women prepared special foods. These holy days punctuated the relentless cycles of work, giving moments of rest, however brief. A curious custom appears in May Day celebrations. Women and men danced around maypoles, their ribbons weaving bright patterns as music filled the green. Records describe maidens crowned as May Queens, leading games that carried echoes of fertility rites. Imagine your hair loose for once, flowers braided in, your laughter rising with the fiddle's tune. The joy felt almost defiant against the harder backdrop of daily life. The sensory world is a whirl. The smell of roasting lamb on Easter, the tang of fresh ale tapped for feasts, the waxy smoke of torches carried in procession. Your ears ring with chanting choirs in Latin, then shift suddenly to the rough songs of villagers staggering from taverns. Your skin prickles under embroidered sleeves you rarely wear except on holy days. Celebration is noisy, colourful, and exhausting. Scholars still argue whether festivals gave women respite or reinforced control. Some claim feast days allowed women to step outside rigid norms, dancing, singing, even mocking men in playful charivaris. Others argue the Church carefully orchestrated these events to reinforce hierarchy, reminding women of their place under God and man. Was it liberation or discipline disguised as joy? The debate remains unsettled. You might be surprised to learn that women often organized the logistics of feast days. They brewed ale in great quantities, baked enormous loaves, and sewed banners or vestments for processions. Without their labor, the celebrations would collapse. Behind every procession's grandeur was a small army of women's hands. Odd traditions pepper the calendar. A scandalous aside, during Shrovetide, before Lent's fast, villagers sometimes staged mock trials of women accused of scolding or nagging, parading them through streets with laughter and jeers. What began as carnival could tip into cruelty, a reminder that merriment often masked discipline. The contrasts are stark. During Lent, your meals shrink to thin pottage and salted fish, your belly gnawing with hunger while priests thunder sermons on restraint. Then Easter bursts forth with roasted meat, spiced pies, and ale flowing until cheeks flush red. Your senses swing violently between famine and feast, humility and indulgence. And then there are pilgrim feasts. When relics were paraded through towns, women joined crowds pressing forward to touch reliquaries, the air thick with incense and human breath. Some fainted from heat or devotion, collapsing as voices roared hymns. For a moment, the sacred and the chaotic blurred into one overwhelming tide. Children remember festivals through sweets, gingerbread, candied almonds, honey cakes, rare luxuries that stick in teeth and memory alike. Women remember them through labor, laughter, and the sting of being both celebrated and controlled. As the day winds down, your skirts brush against trampled grass, your ears ringing with fading music. Tomorrow the fields call again, the pottage simmers again, and life narrows once more. But tonight, under banners and bells, you've danced in a fleeting moment of release, proof that even in a world of hardship, joy carves its place. The veil of mourning drapes heavy across your shoulders, its black wool scratchy against your skin. Widowhood in medieval England is a liminal state, part grief, part danger, part unexpected opportunity. Where marriage once bound you tightly, widowhood reshapes your role, sometimes narrowing your world, sometimes widening it beyond recognition. Wills and property rolls indicate that widows often controlled a third of their late husband's estate, known as dower rights. This portion provided income and security, though collecting it could require bitter disputes with in-laws. In some cases, widows managed farms, shops, or even large estates for decades. Far from being cast aside, they became key figures in their communities, wielding authority rooted not in men's permission, but in survival. One striking detail comes from town records. Widows were among the most active female litigants in courts. They sued for unpaid rents, defended property boundaries, and pursued debtors with tenacity. Imagine standing in a crowded court, veil lowered, voice steady, insisting on your right to land or coin. It is a rare moment when your words carry official weight. The sensory world of widowhood is somber yet practical. The smell of candle wax from funerals clings to your clothes. Your hands fold woolen mourning cloths, rougher than the silks you might once have worn. Nights are colder, the space beside you empty, yet your ears ring with the constant buzz of negotiations, servants asking orders, neighbors offering condolences laced with curiosity. Scholars disagree on whether widowhood was liberating or oppressive. Some argue it granted women a measure of independence unavailable to wives, especially if they remained single. Others note the social pressure to remarry quickly, the suspicion cast on women who managed households alone, and the risks of exploitation. Did widowhood open doors or simply move you into another cage? The debate hums, unresolved. You might be surprised to learn that widows sometimes resisted remarriage fiercely. Charters record women paying fines to the crown for the right not to wed again, essentially buying their own autonomy. For them, independence was worth the cost. Others, however, remarried swiftly, using marriage as a strategy to secure alliances, wealth, or protection. Odd stories suffice too. A scandalous aside from a 15th century court, one widow was accused of taking lovers openly, claiming her freedom now allowed her to live as she pleased. The scandal rocked her parish, proof that autonomy could provoke outrage as much as admiration. The daily life of a widow is layered. You manage servants, oversee harvests, tally rents. The sound of quills scratching in ledgers echoes in your hall. At the market, men glance at you differently, some with respect, others with suspicion, still others with predatory interest. Every transaction is shadowed by your new status, your independence both shield and target. In villages, widowhood can be precarious. Without land or support, some women slip into poverty, reduced to begging or working as servants. The smell of smoke from a poor widow's hearth might be her only comfort, the single pot of thin broth stretching for days. The difference between empowerment and destitution lies in property, kinship, and sheer luck. For noblewomen, widowhood sometimes brings remarkable power. As dowagers, they control estates, patronize churches, and shape dynastic marriages for their children. Chronicles describe dowager queens wielding influence in councils, their signatures shaping politics. Yet even here, their power is always fragile, subject to challenge by ambitious men. As twilight deepens, you sit by the fire, veil slipping loose, staring into the flames. Widowhood is a turning point. Your grief is real, but so is your awareness of new horizons. Tomorrow may bring court battles, proposals, or loneliness. Tonight it brings a moment of stillness, the quiet knowledge that your life, once bound to another's, is now your own to steer however perilously. The silence of the chamber feels heavy, broken only by the creak of the rushes underfoot. Your body in medieval England is never entirely your own. Sexuality, fertility, and control orbit around you like unseen forces, priestly sermons, family expectations, and whispered gossip all converge to dictate how you should live within your own skin. Ecclesiastical court records show how often women were summoned for moral offences, adultery, fornication, even the suspicion of an illicit relationship. Men faced penalties too, but women bore harsher scrutiny. A girl who conceived outside wedlock could be fined, shamed, or paraded as an example of temptation. A wife accused of adultery might lose her dowry or be publicly disgraced, even when her husband's indiscretions passed unpunished. Your body was seen less as yourself, more as a vessel for honor, lineage, and sin. One telling detail emerges from penitential manuals. Priests prescribed specific penances for sexual misdeeds. A woman who strayed might be ordered to fast on bread and water for weeks, or to stand barefoot in church as her neighbors watched. The act of control wasn't just physical, it was psychological, weaving shame into the fabric of daily life. The sensory weight of this scrutiny is palpable. The sour smell of incense during confession, the scrape of knees on cold stone floors, the hush of a priest's voice pressing penance into your ear. Outside, whispers swirl, neighbors speculating, reputations shifting. Your very body feels like a public matter, constantly inspected, never entirely private. Scholars bicker over whether women found ways to shape their sexuality within these constraints. Some argue that affection and passion did thrive inside marriages, hidden behind veils of obedience. Others stress how consistently laws and sermons defined female desire as dangerous, needing control. Was there space for joy and intimacy, or was it always framed as sin? The sources leave tantalizing fragments but no clear answer. You might be surprised to learn that medical texts often blamed women for infertility. If a couple had no children, suspicion almost always fell on the wife. Remedies included bizarre tests, placing garlic or onions near her womb to see if the smell reached her breath. Imagine enduring such humiliations while your husband remained above suspicion. It shows how deeply control was written onto women's bodies. A scandalous aside from urban court roles. Some women ran bawdy houses in London, tolerated because authorities taxed them, yet reviled in sermons as schools of sin. These women walked a razor's edge, profiting from sexuality while enduring constant moral attack. Their very existence proved that the church and civic authorities could condemn with one hand while profiting with the other. The sensory landscape shifts again. In private, you feel the warmth of touch, the softness of linen against skin, the heartbeat of intimacy shared in secret. In public, shame and suspicion follow like shadows. Women's desire is rarely voiced in chronicles, yet it flickers in songs, poems, and court cases where passion left undeniable marks. Control extends to the law as well. Husbands legally commanded conjugal rights. Refusal could be framed as disobedience. Yet wives could sometimes sue for annulment on grounds of impotence, dragging intimate details into public courts. It is a grim irony. Women accused of desiring too much or too little, rarely trusted to simply be. As night draws in, you sit by the fire, veil drawn, listening to sermons echo in your memory. Your body is treated as a battlefield where morality, lineage, and control collide. And yet, beneath the weight of scrutiny, there remains a quiet pulse of selfhood, a knowledge that desire, though silenced in words, still thrums in the marrow of life. The cadence of a foreign tongue drifts through the marketplace, softer than the shouts of English vendors, yet sharp enough to draw curious glances. Foreign women in medieval England walk a delicate line. Strangers in language, clothing, or custom, they are both exoticized and distrusted. Whether as merchants' wives, pilgrims, servants, or noble brides sent across borders, their presence unsettles and reshapes the rhythm of daily life. Customs rolls reveal that merchant families from Flanders, Lombardy, and the Hanseatic League regularly settled in English towns. Their wives joined them, sometimes keeping shops, sometimes weaving continental fashions into English streets. Imagine the sight. A Flemish woman selling fine cloth at a London stall, her accent lilting, her attire brighter than local wool. Neighbours eye her with a mix of envy and suspicion, admiring the fabric while muttering about outsiders taking profit. One curious glimpse emerges from court petitions. Foreign-born widows occasionally appeal directly to the crown for protection of their dower rights, arguing they were unfamiliar with English customs. The very act of petitioning shows both vulnerability and boldness. A woman standing before authority, insisting her foreignness should not erase her property. Your senses sharpen in this space of difference. The smell of imported spices, ginger, nutmeg, saffron wafts from her stall, mingling with the heavier aroma of salted fish. The sound of foreign songs drifts from a tavern corner, unfamiliar rhythms clashing with English ballads. Fabrics shimmer in colors unusual to local eyes, silks and velvets brushing your fingertips with a softness that feels almost unreal against rough homespun. Historians still debate whether these foreign women integrated smoothly or remained marked as outsiders. Some argue they were quickly absorbed, especially through intermarriage and baptism into parish life. Others highlight persistent suspicion, citing riots against foreign merchants where wives and daughters were jeered at alongside their husbands. Did they vanish into Englishness within a generation, or always remain slightly apart? The arguments continue. You might be surprised to learn that foreign noble brides often carried entire retinues of servants and fashions with them. A Castilian princess arriving for marriage might bring Spanish ladies, their speech and dress transforming the English court style overnight. Chroniclers note with fascination and sometimes disapproval when queens introduced new dances, clothing cuts, or religious devotions from abroad. The queen's body itself became a cultural bridge, every gesture symbolizing foreign influence. A scandalous aside lingers in London chronicles. Accusations spread that foreign women taught English wives vain fashions, from towering headgear to daring necklines. Preachers scolded that such styles corrupted modesty, blaming outsiders for tempting the kingdom into vanity. Fashion, as always, was political. What you wore could be treated as a moral threat. Daily life for a foreign woman could be lonely. Language barriers, muffled gossip, kin networks were distant, and customs unfamiliar. The clatter of English jokes might exclude you, while neighbours scrutinized every mistake. Yet some found solidarity, forming small enclaves of shared origin. In ports like Southampton or London's Lombard Street, you could hear whole blocks alive with foreign chatter, kitchens smelling of continental recipes. For peasant women brought across as servants or wives of soldiers, life was harsher. Your accent marked you instantly. Any quarrel might twist into an accusation of deceit. You felt the stares when you prayed slightly differently, dressed a shade more brightly, or muttered a word in your mother tongue. Survival required silence, adaptation, or the careful use of novelty to charm rather than alienate. As evening falls, the marketplace empties, but whispers linger. You adjust your cloak, conscious of how foreign it looks in this setting. Every step reminds you that you stand out, whether for admiration, envy, or suspicion. In medieval England, to be a woman is already to be scrutinized. To be a foreign woman is to live beneath an even harsher lens. Your accent, your clothing, your choices all amplified in a chorus of judgment. The ground trembles faintly beneath your feet, the distant thunder of marching boots rolling across the countryside. War does not ask permission to enter your life, it crashes in, tearing through homes, fields, and families alike. For women in medieval England, war means more than battles fought far away. It means disruption in every corner of daily existence. Chronicles describe how armies on campaign stripped villages bare. Soldiers seized grain, slaughtered livestock, and sometimes forced women into labor or worse. A noble commander might issue orders for restraint, yet hunger and desperation left little discipline among the ranks. For a woman, the sound of hoofbeats at night could mean ruin, the loss of a season's harvest, the destruction of her home, or the tearing apart of her family. One curious fact emerges from muster rolls. Women often followed armies as camp followers. They cooked, mended clothes, carried water, and tended the wounded. Some were wives of soldiers, others sought protection in numbers, and a few even disguised themselves as men to fight. Their presence rarely appears in polished histories, yet the campfires of war glowed with women's labor as much as men's swords. Your senses reel in this world of conflict. The acrid smoke of burned fields stings your eyes. The metallic tang of blood mingles with earth, and the cries of displaced villagers echo across the hills. You feel the rough jolt of a cart under you as families flee, possessions piled high, children clutching at skirts. War is not just clash of knights, it is the grinding of daily life into uncertainty. Historians still argue whether war intensified women's vulnerability or created unexpected avenues of power. Some argue that with men gone to fight, women stepped into roles of estate management, legal defense, and even local leadership. Others emphasize the devastation women left destitute, assaulted, or silenced by the chaos. Did war empower or merely expose? The evidence splits along class, time, and place. You might be surprised to learn that noblewomen sometimes directly defended castles. Records name women like Maud de Braose, who fortified defences, commanded garrisons, and negotiated surrenders. Chroniclers, both admiring and unsettled, describe them as viragos, women who stepped unnervingly into male spheres. Yet such feats, though praised, were treated as anomalies rather than norms. A scandalous aside from the Hundred Years' War, French chronicles accused English women in besieged towns of pouring boiling pitch on attackers from the walls, their hands as deadly as any soldier's bound. Whether embellished or true, such stories fed the sense that women could become fierce when survival demanded it. In villages, war brought subtler wounds. With men conscripted or dead, women tilled fields alone, bartered to survive, and faced taxes levied by both sides. The sound of a distant trumpet might signal not victory but another levy, another demand for food or coin. Even silence could be threatening, because it meant you did not know which banners might appear tomorrow. The emotional toll is heavy. You lie awake at night, hearing the creak of your doorframe in the wind, wondering if strangers will burst in. You clutch your children close, promising safety you cannot guarantee. You step into fields at dawn, eyes scanning for smoke on the horizon, ears straining for hoofbeats. War makes even ordinary tasks tremble with fear. And yet, resilience blooms. Women stitched banners, raised ransoms, brokered local truces, and prayed fiercely for absent sons and husbands. Some became symbols of endurance, their names remembered in local lore. Others disappeared into silence, their struggles swallowed by history's louder voices. As the day ends, the ground still feels unstable beneath you. War leaves no corner untouched, reshaping women's lives with fire, loss, and the rare glimmer of defiance. In medieval England, you do not stand apart from conflict, you endure it. Your survival, another unrecorded victory in a world written by battles. The bell tolls slowly, its hollow echo rolling across empty streets. The air is thick with a sour, unshakable stench smoke from hastily burned clothing, rot from uncollected bodies, and the acrid tang of lime scattered to fight contagion. Plague has arrived, and for women in medieval England, survival is no longer about hard work or sharp wit. It is about enduring the terror that seeps into every breath. Parish death registers show whole families gone within weeks, names scratched out in clusters as if the ink itself wept. Women carried a unique burden. They nursed the sick, buried children, and held households together when neighbours fled. Some died from infection caught at the bedside, others from exhaustion after weeks of tending. The image of a mother sitting vigil, clutching a rosary as fever racked her child, repeats endlessly across villages and towns. One curious glimpse comes from wills hastily written during outbreaks. Some women, realizing their lives might end in days, rushed to bequeath bedding, pots, or jewelry to daughters and neighbours. These tiny inventories, a brass pot, a feather bed, my best hood, become haunting testaments to daily life halted mid-breath. Your senses shrink under the plague's assault. You smell smoke from constant fires meant to purify air. You hear the rattle of carts carrying bodies to mass graves, the muffled chant of priests growing hoarse from endless funerals. Touch itself becomes dangerous. Neighbours avoid embraces, Hands recoil from hands. Even the air feels cursed. Every breeze suspected of carrying death. Scholars still argue whether the plague opened space for women's economic advancement or left them more vulnerable. Some evidence suggests that with labour scarce, women filled roles once barred to them, running shops, hiring out as workers, managing farms alone. Others argue that gains were temporary, snuffed out once the crisis passed. Was plague a crack in patriarchy, or merely a grim pause in its pressure? The debate lingers like the smoke itself. You might be surprised to learn that women sometimes served as plague searchers appointed to inspect houses, identify the sick, and report deaths. It was perilous work, exposing them daily to infection, yet also a grim recognition of women's knowledge of households and bodies. Payment was small, but their role carved a trace of authority into catastrophe. A scandalous aside surfaces from London Chronicles. Some women were accused of looting from plague houses, stealing clothing or trinkets from the dead. Whether true or imagined, such stories reveal the desperation and suspicion swirling in a world turned upside down. Hunger, fear, and grief blurred moral lines. The emotional weight presses harder than hunger ever did. You lie awake at night, listening for the rasp of a loved one's breath, wondering if tomorrow they will still be alive. You stitch charms into clothing, sprinkle vinegar on doorsteps, or burn herbs in frantic hope. Each day is a gamble between faith and futility. Yet amid the devastation, resilience flickers. Women became memory keepers, ensuring names were spoken even when entire households vanished. They tended shrines, lit candles, and whispered prayers for the countless lost. In some towns, widows emerged as pillars of recovery, using what remained of their households to stabilize communities. As dusk settles, silence feels heavier than sound. Streets once filled with gossip are empty. Markets once crowded with noise echo hollowly. You wrap your shawl tighter, the smell of smoke in every fold, and pray that the cough in your chest is nothing more than dust. The plague leaves scars not only on bodies but on memory, reshaping life for those women who endure, even if history records them only as numbers in the margins. The ink of a will dries slowly on rough parchment, sealing what little you can pass on. Legacy in medieval England is rarely written in women's names, yet women carve remembrance in subtler ways, through stories whispered to children, embroidery passed down, or the faint scratch of their signatures when law allowed it. Memory lingers not only in monuments but in the daily traces women leave behind. Probate records indicate that widows and wives carefully listed belongings: a bedstead, a cooking pot, a silver clasp, sometimes even a gown. These were not trivial. Each object carried weight, both economic and emotional. To leave a feather mattress to a daughter was to promise her comfort. To gift a rosary was to pass on faith. To bequeath clothing was to stitch yourself into her future. For many women, their wills became their voices, one of the few moments society listened. One curious glimpse comes from parish carvings and wall paintings. Though few women's names survive, their likenesses sometimes appear kneeling beside husbands, small figures etched in stone. Their names might be shortened, Johanne, wife of, yet the presence is still there, a quiet assertion of belonging to history. Imagine your profile chipped into cold alabaster, small but enduring. Your senses move through spaces heavy with memory. The waxy scent of a candle lit for the dead in church, the faint perfume of lavender sachets sewn into chests, the texture of worn cloth folded carefully to be passed on. Each item feels ordinary and eternal, binding the living to the lost. Scholars still debate how much agency women truly had in shaping their legacies. Some argue that wills and donations to churches show deliberate strategy, ensuring prayers for their souls and inheritance for daughters. Others contend women's choices were often constrained, dictated by male relatives or custom. Was legacy active or passive? The truth, as ever, blurs. You might be surprised to learn that poetry and song sometimes immortalized women otherwise invisible. Ballads recorded mothers, warning daughters, or widows lamenting husbands. These verses may not name them, but their voices thread through rhyme and melody, echoing across taverns and halls. Their legacies live not in stone, but in sound. A scandalous aside. A 15th century nun left behind a manuscript filled not only with prayers, but with marginal doodles of animals and jokes. Her humour slipped between Latin verses, a playful rebellion against solemnity. Though anonymous, her quirks survived, a legacy far livelier than the stern chronicles around her. In noble circles, patronage became a powerful tool. Queens and ladies endowed chapels, sponsored manuscripts, and commissioned artworks that bore their crests. Their names lingered on stained glass, painted beneath saints, stitched into altar cloths. Even if chroniclers downplayed their roles, the art itself testifies. Women's choices shaped what endured. Legacy also lived in oral tradition. Around hearths, grandmothers told stories of ancestors, midwives passed down healing charms, and weavers taught patterns their mothers had taught them. These were legacies without parchment, carried in muscle memory and voice, often lost to archives but never to life. As evening falls, you sit by the fire, pressing a small keepsake into a daughter's hand. Perhaps it is a rosary bead, perhaps a fragment of embroidered cloth. You tell her the story of where it came from, and in her eyes you see recognition, the beginning of remembrance. History may not record your name in bold letters, but it will linger in objects, prayers, and tales passed from your lips to hers. The air is cool, the stars scattered faintly above the thatched rooftops. A hush has fallen over your medieval village, but in this quiet you feel the weight of centuries pressing down. You have walked through a lifetime of women's experiences, birth, work, worship, fear, joy, and now you sense how those threads braid together. Tonight is less about the chores at dawn or the sermons at dusk, and more about how these lives echo beyond their own time. Royal chronicles remind us that women's names surface most visibly when tied to politics, queens, heiresses, and noble patrons. Yet the vast majority of women left subtler marks: a line in a baptism register, a recipe in a household notebook, a candle gifted to a church. Their world was intimate, carved in kitchens and chapels, yet it shaped the very survival of communities. Without their endless work, the kingdoms chronicled in battles and treaties would have collapsed long before parchment dried. One striking legacy lies in the role of memory keepers. Women told stories of saints and ancestors, passing down traditions that rooted families in identity. These oral histories, rarely written, shaped how people understood their past. Imagine a grandmother seated by the hearth, weaving tales that blend fact, faith, and folklore, her voice rising over the crackle of fire. The official records may ignore her, but generations carried her words into the future. The sensory landscape of remembrance is rich. You feel wax between your fingers as you mold a votive candle in memory of the dead. You smell the mingling of herbs tucked into coffins to mask decay. You hear tolling bells marking souls departing, each note weighted with grief and continuity. Memory itself becomes tangible, stitched into fabrics, etched into stone, whispered in songs. Scholars still debate whether women's contributions to history should be measured by power or by persistence. Some argue that without political clout or formal authorship, women's influence remained marginal. Others insist that their unseen labor, raising children, healing the sick, managing households, was the invisible scaffolding of society. Was history shaped only by those named in chronicles, or equally by those who never signed their names? The argument is ongoing, much like the echoes of footsteps in quiet village lanes. You might be surprised to learn that saints' cults often elevated women's legacies. Local shrines venerated holy women, their miracles woven into community identity. Pilgrims carried their names across England, binding memory to place. Even women who never reached sainthood sometimes lingered in folk tales as healers, martyrs, or uncanny figures half respected, half feared. And then there are the odd traces. A scandalous aside tells of a 15th century widow whose will requested money not for prayers but for ale to be shared among friends. Historians puzzle over whether this was generosity, humour, or rebellion. Either way, her final act made her community remember her not with solemn fasting but with laughter and drink. Your ears fill with multiple voices, minstrels singing ballads of ladies wronged or loyal, priests intoning names of noble patrons, neighbors gossiping about women long gone. These voices tangle, sometimes contradicting, but together they keep memory alive. Even slander and rumor ensure women are not forgotten. A whisper can last as long as a carved name. As you reflect, patterns emerge. Women's lives are bound by duty yet laced with resilience. They suffer loss yet carve joy in festivals. They endure suspicion yet keep healing. They manage estates, they labor in fields, they whisper stories into ears too young to understand. Each action is small, but accumulated they form the spine of medieval life. The continuity of women's experience is felt most in inheritance not only of property but of practice. A mother passes down a cooking pot, blackened with years of use. A nun copies a prayer that another woman will whisper in darkness. A midwife teaches her apprentice the right herb for fevers. These inheritances stitch women's lives across time, unbroken by silence. The contradictions remain too. For every noblewoman commanding a castle, thousands labored invisibly in kitchens. For every abbess writing letters, countless wives left no trace beyond parish records. Yet invisibility does not mean insignificance. Their absence from chronicles is not erasure from history. It is an invitation to listen differently to the smell of bread baking, the sound of lullabies, the texture of wool against skin. As dawn begins to brighten the edge of your imagined horizon, you realize this journey has revealed not a single story but a chorus. Women in medieval England lived lives at once fragile and resilient, confined and resourceful, silenced and enduring. Their realities were not romantic but raw, filled with hardship yet threaded through with stubborn joy. Your final scene lingers. A woman by the fire, children at her feet, her hands never still as she spins wool. Outside, bells toll for another day, another task, another turning of the wheel. History may not remember her name, but without her, there would be no tomorrow for those who came after. The night softens now, the fire in your mind's eye dimming to embers. The footsteps in the mud, the echoes of bells, the whispers of gossip, they fade into silence, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own breath. The lives of medieval women, so dense with labor and longing, become lighter as the weight of history drifts into dreams. Picture a candle burning low on a wooden table, its wax pooling slowly, the flame shrinking but steady. Around it lies the hush of a sleeping household, the creak of rafters, the faint sigh of the wind outside. In this stillness you feel how their world and yours connect not through grand battles or royal decrees, but through simple acts of endurance, care, and memory. You imagine the scent of herbs, lavender, rosemary, sage woven into pillows, easing tired minds into rest. You feel the warmth of a wool blanket, heavy but comforting, wrapped around you like the centuries themselves. Time slows. The boundaries between then and now blur into quiet. Let the images settle gently. Women spinning by firelight, kneeling in prayer, laughing in festivals, mourning at gravesides. Their voices become softer, blending into the hum of night. You no longer need to strain to hear them. They are part of the silence now, woven into the calm. Breathe in once more, slowly. Release the weight of markets, laws, and fears. Let the rhythm of history dissolve into stillness. The story has unfolded, and it no longer demands your attention. It is simply there, resting with you. And so, with the last echoes of bells fading, let your eyes close. The night is yours now. Sleep comes gently, carrying the whispers of medieval women into your dreams. Sweet dreams.